Darkness. Just the sound of metal striking earth. Not the sound of a fresh grave being dug. Something wrong about it. Drier, angrier. The sound of a blade cracking against rotted wood that should have been left alone 30 years ago. A torch moves between the headstones of the Founders Cemetery on the edge of Millbrook Junction, Kansas. 4 men, not gravediggers. Gravediggers work in silence, with respect, because they know the ground they turn today will turn them one day too. These men work laughing low, spitting between one cross and the next, treating every carved name like it was nothing but firewood. One of them kicks a pine cross until it topples sideways. The cross had a name on it. Ezra Coldwell, 1839-1867, Union soldier. "This one didn't even have family," the man who kicked it says. "Nobody's gonna miss it." He's wrong. A window opens in the nearest house. An old woman appears barefoot on the porch, white hair loose, a shawl thrown over her nightdress in a hurry. Her name is Adeline Coldwell, Ezra's widow, 15 years now. She comes down the steps running, and running, for a woman of 68, is the kind of thing a body only does when the heart hasn't yet learned to be afraid of its own age. "That's my husband," she shouts. "That's Ezra down there." A 5th man arrives on horseback, sheriff's star on his chest. He doesn't dismount. He doesn't even look at the fallen cross. "Go on back inside, Mrs. Coldwell," he says. The voice isn't cruel. It's worse than cruel. It's patient. The way a man talks to a child who hasn't figured out yet that she's already lost the argument. "You swore to protect this town," she says. "I swore to protect what this town's gonna be," the sheriff says, "not what it used to be." He turns his horse and rides off before she can find the words to answer. The torch keeps moving between the stones. The shovel keeps striking wood that should have been left in peace. Millbrook Junction, Kansas, 1882, 17 years after Appomattox, and the town's newest war hadn't even started yet, not the real one. Cole Harlan hadn't come to save anybody. He'd come because Shadow needed a new set of shoes, and he needed coffee that hadn't been boiled 3 times in the same water. Millbrook Junction showed up along the road the way small towns always show up for a man traveling without a fixed destination, as a pause, not a purpose. He smelled it before he saw it. Disturbed dust, the particular kind that only rises when ground has been opened in a hurry instead of with care. Then he saw it. A stretch of white picket fence, torn down and stacked like cordwood beside the road. Behind it, a field of headstones, some stone, most weathered gray wooden crosses. And in the middle of them, 3 wagons from the Union Pacific Southern Railroad. Men working picks and chains, and a woman standing between 2 open graves with her arms spread wide, as though she alone could stop a railroad company with the weight of her own body. Cole dismounted slow. Not because he'd decided anything yet, just because a man who's seen enough of the world learns never to walk into a scene like this at a run. Running is for men who haven't yet understood the size of the problem. "Ma'am," he said, close enough to be heard, far enough not to look like trouble. "You need help?" She looked at him, the faded poncho, eyes too pale for the rest of a face weathered by sun, and for a second seemed ready to send him off, the way she'd sent off half a dozen other strangers who'd passed through and chosen not to see. But something in the way he stood, unhurried, hand nowhere near his gun, made her change her mind. "My husband's been buried here 15 years, she said. "They're telling me by morning I won't even know where." A railroad foreman, heavy-set, checkered vest, the kind of man who'd clearly never dug a grave in his life and never would, approached with a paper in hand. "Municipal authorization," he said, to no one in particular. "Signed by the sheriff. Company's got right of relocation to clear the way for the regional depot." He said it the way men say sentences they've memorized and never once thought about the meaning of. Cole looked at the paper. Everything in order, on paper. Signature, seal, date. The kind of document that looks like truth because it has the shape of truth. "Who's the sheriff?" Cole asked. "Amos Cade," the widow said, and the way she said the name, no anger in it, just a tiredness that had moved past anger a long time ago, told Cole more about the man than any description could have. He didn't answer right away. He looked out over the cemetery instead, counted the fallen crosses, 11. Counted the ones still standing, 23. Did the math on how much time was left before that number hit 0. And the math wasn't good. "I'm going to walk around town a while," was all he said. The Millbrook Junction Saloon carried the particular quiet of a place where people had learned to drink without talking about what actually mattered. Cole sat at the bar, ordered coffee, and let the silence do the work it always did. Wait until somebody decided they needed to talk more than they needed to stay quiet. It was a man in his 70s, shirt sleeve pinned where his left arm should have been, who sat down beside him uninvited. "Lost the arm at Vicksburg," the man said, as if that explained why he was striking up conversation with a stranger. "Name's Silas Renner. Helped found this town, me and 11 other men, back in '66. 9 of them are lying in that field you saw today." Cole Harlan. Silas nodded, like the name already meant something to him, though he didn't say what.
"You met the sheriff yet?"
"Not yet." "Amos Cade," Silas said, spitting the name out like a pit from a piece of fruit. "Wears our star. Never fought our war. Never knew a single man lying under that ground." He drank. "Railroad put him here 3 years back. Old Sheriff Tom Whitfield disappeared in a way nobody ever explained to my satisfaction. One day he was here. Next he'd gone off on business and never came back.
Railroad
Nobody
wants to
looked
build
into
right
it?
on that ground because it's the only
We
flat
looked,
stretch within
Silas
5 miles
said.
that doesn't belong to a working
Cade
farm.
said he
Cheaper to
investigated.
dig up the dead than
Said
negotiate with the
Whitfield
living.
ran off with money from the town treasury." He looked at Cole. Nobody who actually knew Tom Whitfield believed that for 1 second. Cole filed that away the way he filed everything he didn't yet know where to place. "What's the sheriff want with the cemetery?" "The regional depot," Silas said. "Railroad wants to build right on that ground because it's the only flat stretch within 5 miles that doesn't belong to a working farm. Cheaper to dig up the dead than negotiate with the living." He set his glass down harder than he meant to. "Cade thinks he's modernizing this town. Thinks it, truly. He's not a bad man, Mr. Harlan. He's worse. He's a man who's convinced himself that doing wrong is the right thing to do. That's no comfort." "No," Silas said. "It isn't." Cole spent the rest of the afternoon doing what he always did, listening. Listened to the shopkeeper's wife tell how Cade had seized the Halloran land 2 years back to clear the right-of-way, and the family had never been seen in the county again. Listened to the blacksmith tell how anyone who spoke out against the railroad ended up jailed for disturbing the peace. Just long enough to learn the lesson, never long enough to become a martyr. Heard 3 times from 3 different people the same line, repeated like it was Cade's personal signature. Progress requires sacrifice. Nobody in Millbrook Junction respected the sheriff, and still nobody had the nerve to take the star off him. Because standing behind Cade was a company, and standing behind the company were lawyers, and standing behind the lawyers was a carefully cultivated feeling that fighting any of it was like fighting the weather. Cole understood, before he'd even met Cade face to face, that this wasn't a man he was going to solve with a bullet. Men like Cade don't bend to threats. They bend when the ground beneath them, the certainty that they're right, starts to crack. The question was where to find the axe. The answer came from a place Cole didn't expect. It was Adeline Coldwell who found him that night, knocking on the door of the room he'd rented above the general store, carrying a lantern and a look that mixed shame with urgency. "I know something," she said. "Never told a soul because I was scared. Still am." Cole let her in. "Before he vanished," she said, "Tom Whitfield came to me. Said he'd hidden something important, and if anything ever happened to him, I ought to know where to look. But I wasn't to tell a soul, not even the town council, because he didn't trust the council anymore either." She took a breath. He said, "Adeline, I'm going to leave it with the only men in this town the railroad can't buy." Cole waited. "The dead," she said. "He hid something inside my husband's grave, Mr. Harlan. Opened Ezra's coffin in the dead of night, a month before he disappeared, and put a metal box inside. said it was safer there than in any safe in this town, because no man robs a grave for fear of what God does to grave robbers. She looked down at her own hands. But the railroad's not afraid of God, Mr. Harlan. Come morning, they'll open that grave anyway. And whatever's inside will either be lost for good in their hands, or it can finally be worth something. Cole understood right then that the race against time wasn't about saving a cemetery anymore. It was about reaching one specific grave before the railroad opened it for an entirely different reason, and turning their own act of destruction into the very proof that was going to bring them down. "I'll need your permission," he said, "and I'll need 2 witnesses this town trusts." At 3 in the morning, under a thin moon that barely lit the cemetery, Cole, Adeline, Silas Renner, and a second veteran named Josiah Marsh dug up Ezra Coldwell's grave. It wasn't quick. It wasn't easy. Cole worked in silence, with the same respect that had been missing in the men with the torch the night before. And when the shovel finally struck metal, everyone stopped. Inside the box were 2 documents. The first was the original founding charter of Millbrook Junction, dated 1866, signed by 12 men, the 12 founders, 3 of whom, including Silas Renner, were still living. The charter contained a clause time had let everyone forget. The founders' cemetery land was inalienable community property, and any relocation required the unanimous consent of the surviving founders, not the signature of a sheriff hired 16 years after the town already existed. The second document was worse for Cade. It was a report, handwritten by Tom Whitfield himself, dated 3 days before his disappearance, detailing the payments Cade had been taking from the Union Pacific Southern, not a sheriff's salary, but commissions tied to every acre he managed to clear for the railroad. And a final line, written in the rushed hand of a man who knew he was being watched. "If anything happens to me, it'll be because I found out too much about what he did with the money, not what he did with the law." Cole read it twice, then looked at Silas. "He didn't run," Silas said quietly, his voice cracking for the first time since Cole had met him. "No," Cole said. "He found out too much." Nobody needed to say the rest out loud. Everyone standing there knew, without a shred of proof beyond instinct, that somewhere beyond the edge of that town there was a second unmarked grave, and that it belonged to Millbrook Junction too. Cole went to the sheriff's office at first light, alone, the documents held inside his coat. He hadn't come to arrest anybody. He'd come because he believed, the way he'd always believed, that every man deserves a chance to choose the road back before somebody forces him down the road out front. Amos Cade was sitting behind his desk, star already pinned to his vest, coffee already gone cold in the cup. He was a man in his mid-40s, dressed better than most small-town men ever bothered to, with the kind of face that ages fast on a man who spent years justifying his own choices to himself before he ever has to justify them to anyone else. "Came here to head something off," Cole said, sitting without being asked. "Head off what?" "You're about to lose everything today, Cade. The way it's headed, you can choose to lose it with some dignity, or you can lose it getting dragged. That's the only offer I've got." Cade laughed, not mockery, just the tired sound of a man who's heard enough threats that he's stopped being scared of them. "Those dead men don't build the future of this county, Mr. Harlan. I do." "Those men built the town you're trying to sell," Cole said. "You just showed up after and decided none of what came before you mattered." "Progress requires sacrifice," Cade said, and for the first time Cole heard something in the line besides conviction. Heard the tired echo of a phrase repeated so many times it had stopped meaning anything, even to the man saying it. "Sacrifice from who, Cade?" Cole asked. "Because I walked this whole town yesterday, and the only thing this railroad sacrificed so far is the trust of every single person who lived here before it ever showed up." Cade didn't answer. "Tom Whitfield knew something you didn't want him to know," Cole said, quiet. No accusation in it, just the plain weight of a fact. "And come morning, when this whole town's standing in that cemetery, everybody's going to know it too." Something shifted in Cade's face. Not fear exactly, but the sudden recognition of a man realizing, too late, that he'd spent years playing a game he thought he controlled, and never once had. "Get out of my town before sunrise," he said, but the voice had lost its earlier weight. "It's not your town," Cole said, standing. "Never was. And come morning, it's going to remember that." At sunrise, nearly all of Millbrook Junction had gathered at the Founders Cemetery. The railroad wagons arrived first, chains and picks. Then Cade rode in, star catching the low morning light, certain this would be just another morning's work. Cole was already waiting at the cemetery gate. Beside him stood Silas Renner, Josiah Marsh, and a third founder named Elias Grant, the only 3 of the 12 original signers still living. Behind them, most of the town stood in silence, the particular silence of a crowd that isn't quiet because it has nothing to say, but because it's finally decided to wait and see who speaks first. The railroad engineer, a practical man named Holloway, no personal stake in any of this, only interested in the schedule, stepped down from his wagon with the same authorization paper Cole had seen the day before. "We need to get started," Holloway said. "Already lost a day." Cole stepped forward and held out the founding charter. "Before you do," he said, "I think you'd better read this." Holloway read it, frowned, read it again, looked at Cade. "Is this filed?" "Will be, soon as it reaches the territorial office in Topeka," Cole said. "But here's what matters today. This ground is inalienable community property, protected by a founding clause, and it can't be relocated without unanimous consent from the surviving founders." He nodded towards Silas, Josiah, and Elias. "Here they stand. None of them signed a thing." Holloway looked at Cade again, and this time the look wasn't confusion. It was a man calculating exactly how much money the company was about to lose in a territorial lawsuit over a title that should have been verified 3 years ago. "Company's not going to fight this," Holloway said, folding the paper. "Not worth the legal exposure." He looked at Cade one last time. "You told me this title was clean, Cade." "It was," Cade said, but his voice no longer carried its own certainty. "It wasn't," Cole said. And then, without raising his voice, without touching his gun, he drew the second document from his coat, Tom Whitfield's report, and held it up where the whole town could see the paper, even if they were too far off to read the words. The silence that fell over the cemetery wasn't the silence before a gunshot. It was another kind entirely. The silence of an entire town understanding, all at once, a truth it had suspected for years, but never once dared say out loud. Cade looked out at the crowd, searched for one face on his side. Found none. "You want me to leave my own town?" he said, and there was something almost pitiful in the question. The last thread of a man clinging to a belonging he'd already destroyed with his own 2 hands. Cole took a step forward. When his voice came, it carried no anger in it at all. Just the plain, final weight of a truth spoken without hurry. "No," he said. "It's an order." Holloway was already climbing back onto his wagon. "Pack it up," he told his men, without so much as another glance at Cade. "We're heading back to Topeka." And that, in the end, was what broke Cade. Not the charter, not the report, not the look in Cole Harlan's eyes. It was watching the very company he'd spent 3 years serving turn its back on him without a single word, the moment he stopped being useful to it. Cade sat his horse a long minute. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. He looked out over the cemetery, at the still open graves, at Adeline Coldwell standing beside her husband's grave with her hands folded in front of her. He looked at the whole town he'd sworn to protect and spent years selling off, piece by piece, in the name of a word he'd said so many times he'd forgotten to ask who, exactly, the sacrifice was for. Slowly, he unpinned the star from his chest. He didn't throw it down, didn't make a show of it. He just held it a moment between his fingers, the way a man weighs something for the first time after years of carrying it without feeling the weight, and set it down on the cemetery gate, between the 2 open graves. "Tell Topeka," he said to no one in particular. The title was never clean. He mounted and rode out of Millbrook Junction on the North Road. No escort, no hurry, no one following behind him. He wasn't beaten by a bullet. He was beaten by the same thing that brings down every man who chooses to serve power instead of people. The day the power decides it doesn't need him anymore. The town spent that whole afternoon rebuilding the cemetery fence. Nobody had to ask. Silas Renner held the boards while Josiah Marsh drove the nails, both men working with the proud slowness of men who dug trenches together half a century before and knew that some jobs deserved to be done unhurried. Adeline Coldwell set Ezra's cross back in place with her own hands, pressing the base back into the ground Cole had opened and closed the night before. She knelt there a long while, not crying this time, just resting her hand on the wood the way you rest a hand on the shoulder of someone who can finally take their rest. Cole stood near the gate, watching the work, not stepping in too close. Some things a town needs to finish on its own, even after the stranger who helped start it has done his part. It was Silas who came to him near dusk, his one arm resting on the newly mended gate. "What do we do with this?" he asked, looking down at Cade's star, still lying where he'd left it. "Keep it," Cole said. "Not to wear again. Just to remember a star isn't worth anything without a town that decides to trust it." Silas nodded slowly. "You're not staying to see this through in Topeka." "Don't need to," Cole said. "You've got the documents, 3 living witnesses, and a whole town that finally remembered what it is. That's stronger than anything I could do by sticking around." He saddled Shadow slow, the new shoe striking the ground firm for the first time since the morning before. The one thing, in the end, he'd actually ridden into Millbrook Junction to find. Before he swung up, he looked back once more at the cemetery, at the fence standing again, at the crosses set back one by one in the places they should have stood the whole time. "Railroads build depots," he said, more to himself than to Silas. But it was men like these that built the West. He rode north, the way he always did, while the church bell in Millbrook Junction rang out behind him for the first time in 3 years for a reason that wasn't a funeral.